All right, everybody. Welcome to another Firebase After Hours. My name is Peter. I'm a developer advocate on the Firebase team. And today I'm super excited to be here with you and with two exciting guests and an exciting topic. But before we get into the topic, just a brief reminder. We have a live stream. You can ask questions on the live stream on the chat. Be polite and civil. Let's be excellent to each other. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. We will pick them up and ask them to our guests for today. If there are any questions we can't answer, we'll try to answer them after the stream. But in the past, we've always been able to answer all of your questions. And with that, let's bring in our other guests and my co-host, Nohe. Hey, folks. How are you doing?
Hey there.
Peter, you said
Hello.
two exciting guests, but there's three of us. So,
Yeah, guests and a co-host,
oh,
right?
there we go.
Yeah, great save. All right. So, as always, I think it's good for the people on the stream to get to know our guests. So let's go around the room and you can introduce yourselves. And Noe, what should we do as an icebreaker?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
Let's do programming languages and tabs versus spaces. Why don't we start with the best dressed man that we have had on the show ever, James? Introduce yourself.
All right.
What do you do? And tabs versus spaces. And what's your favorite programming language?
All right. Hey there, everyone. I'm James Daniels. I'm a developer relations engineer on the Firebase team. I work a lot on our web SDKs. So I'm going to go with my favorite language being TypeScript. I used to be a big Ruby guy, but these days, JavaScript, that's the name of the game. Tabs versus spaces, I'm going to be very controversial here. Both.
Oh.
So I think you should use tabs for indentation because anyone can adjust the width based off their preferences without messing up the entire code base. And you should use spaces for alignment on line breaks. So that's my spicy take.
Yeah, great. Cool. All right, Julia.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Julia. I'm a product manager on the Firebase team. I've been on the Firebase team for a little over 2 years now. And let's see, programming language. Well, I would say when I was studying computer science at school, the main programming language they used in our classes was C++. So yeah, I don't know if that's a hot take, but that is always my go-to. If I was doing a coding interview question or anything, C++ was my go-to language. So yeah, I'll say C++. And tabs versus spaces, I think spaces for me.
And how many of them?
4.
4. All right. No, do you remember last time we had like an egregious amount of spaces that somebody suggested? What? 8, I think.
It was
right?
8, right, from Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Insanity.
Yeah. It's insane. Yeah. All right, Noe.
Oh.
What about you?
Yeah, I generally like Go, and I usually just use the Go formatter to format my code, so I don't worry about tabs or spaces. I just write everything on one line, and then save, and then boom, just it formats it for me, so I never check.
Yeah, linting rules is the real answer here. Is like you just need to establish and pick something and enforce it with lint.
Yeah. I'll stick with Swift, and I think 2 spaces is my preference. But yeah, I agree. This should be something that's being handled for you. But whenever I have a formatter on auto, I am upset when the formatter breaks my lines in a way that I don't like. So maybe I can teach a formatter to be, smart and break the lines like I would prefer. So, all right. So the topic for today is Firebase App Hosting, and so you probably have seen this coming. What is Firebase App Hosting? Why is it here? How is it different from Firebase Hosting? What should people choose? Where are we coming from? Where are we going to? The existential questions of hosting. Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to jump in here. I mean, I've been doing a lot of work with our web stuff for years and years now. I worked on original hosting. I also did a lot of the early advocacy work when Cloud Functions was brand new. So I think I have a good sense of the history and here, and it's really that Firebase Hosting was developed in the era of single page applications, right? It is web apps were moving to be more like native applications. You wanted that native like experience, even if it was in the browser. So that really meant the server was just an API backend. You talk to it via fetch calls, and everything else was heavy client side, right? Thick clients. So all your JavaScript bundles, everything. And if you did render some HTML from the server side, it's just placeholder. It's just your index HTML, rewrite everything to that. Blank page, you must have JavaScript enabled to use this site, right? And then you do everything else via the script tag. Then your API side, your servers, they were a completely different team and a completely different code base, and oftentimes written in a different language, right? So then we had Cloud Functions, which was our serverless product for these APIs with a really nice domain-specific language around them. And we started getting more and more requests to support server-side rendering. Server-side rendering was very emerging a couple of years ago, right? It wasn't a great developer experience, but people were doing it for performance and SEO reasons. And it was very much the exception to the rule, though, right? Your application was largely still a single-page application. Maybe a couple routes you want dynamic. Maybe some applications were fully SSR. That was very painful to do in a single code base for one of these frameworks. So we started allowing rewrites to Cloud Functions or Cloud Run, right? So you have hosting built for SPAs. You let a couple routes through to a backend if the CDN misses. So that kind of served its purpose. But in the last few years, the web landscape has dramatically changed. We have these new modern frameworks. We have Next.js and Angular Universal, to name a few. And they have changed the paradigm. I feel like the DevX for building a hybrid server client application has gotten much better, as well as we have meta frameworks now. So we have these web frameworks that come with API routes built in. So you have a monolithic code base, right? And you want to deploy that. That's hard to do, right? That's hard to do. It challenges all the assumptions of Firebase Hosting and Cloud Functions. It's hard to do correctly in a serverless way. So if you are rewriting to a Cloud Function, that's hard work. A few years back, and you might have seen some videos with Julia and I, where we launched this experimental web frameworks integration with the Firebase CLI. So you take a Next.js and an Angular code base and deploy it, and it just works. Like I said, it's hard to get right. It was a challenge maintaining that. It was an experiment. And we decided what we really needed was a ground-up rewrite of our hosting product to support SSR applications first and foremost. So that is what Firebase App Hosting is. Firebase App Hosting is a reimagining of our hosting product to focus on SSR and meta frameworks first, and then allow optimizations with the CDN, but really for that SSR use case. So in that way, they're two very different products. And I think eventually, right, they can unify and we can have the best of both worlds. But for the time being, we see it as a very different problem to solve, one that we had great difficulty doing in Cloud Functions. So that's why we went with Cloud Run and the CDN in front of that.
So is it fair to say that by spinning up an entirely new product, you gave yourself the greenfield experience of, being free to make completely new decisions, not being bogged down by any historic decisions and architectural choices, and being able to move faster? Is that correct?
Yeah. It really was a ground up re-envisioning. Julia, do you want to add some color to that?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with everything that James was saying. And I think the desire to better support server rendered frameworks was our primary motive for building Firebase App Hosting. But in addition to supporting SSR frameworks, there were other ways that we wanted to modernize Firebase's hosting solutions. It's very common now for developers to expect their hosting solution to have first-class Git integration. And we wanted to be able to build something from the ground up that really integrated seamlessly with GitHub without requiring any manual configuration of GitHub Actions. We wanted to give developers a nice dashboard where they could track their rollout history, tied to an exact Git commit, things like that. So yeah, it was server-side rendering was the primary gap in our portfolio that we needed to fill, but we also took the opportunity to modernize app hosting in a few other ways, Git integration being one of the primary differentiators.
Mm-hmm. No, you go ahead. You seem like
I right on the tip
you
of my
have
tongue.
a question right there.
So I heard that you mentioned that you use Cloud Run and you use Cloud CDN, and this might be a little bit too much to ask for, but like, how do you determine what goes where when you deploy?
Yeah. So we use something called build packs, which is a Google Cloud technology. People might be familiar with that already. And if you were to deploy from source with Cloud Run, you get a Node.js build pack. App Hosting uses that plus framework-specific build packs that the Firebase team has created and maintains. So we have a build pack for Next.js, we have a build pack for Angular, and these build packs use adapters to understand Next.js and Angular configurations and where the static assets are, and then they tell Firebase App Hosting where those static assets are, and we can look at cache control headers to figure out what gets cached on the CDN versus served out of Cloud Run. And right now, everything is served out of Cloud Run initially. One thing that we are working on is improving the way that we handle static assets so that Cloud Run isn't created unnecessarily. Like if your app doesn't need server-side rendering all the time. James, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you build an application, right, you have your SSR, server-side rendering, as well as your SSG, static site generation. So parts of your page can be purely static, or it can use incremental static regeneration. And those parts we could potentially prime the CDN. This would be acting a little bit more like Firebase Hosting does. So that's kind of the experience that we're looking at, because for your static assets, for your pre-rendered assets, that's just extra cost and complexity for it to hit Cloud Run every time. And really the game here is convention over configuration. We want to, out of the box, given a Next.js or Angular app, detect as much as we can and make the right choices for the developer so your application just works. Eventually, we would like it to be more configurable, right? But really, and this is why we're specifically focusing on Next.js and Angular Universal, is we want to make those right choices for the developer, build the correct infrastructure for them when we first deploy, and really nail that experience. Once we do that, we'll expand it out. We'll allow more frameworks. We'll allow you to build your own configuration will allow you to choose your architectural pieces. But really, it's about nailing that. And to be frank, right, like getting Next.js working with all of its bells and whistles is really hard to get right on serverless compute and behind a CDN. And that's the experience that we're trying to nail.
So there's one question that I want to ask that I'm going to beat chat to. You said more framework support. And there's one big framework I'm thinking of that begins with an F and ends with a letter. Any plans or excitement around that, or is it kind of in the kitchen maybe
I can
cooking?
take this. So for Flutter Web, those apps are purely static apps. They don't need Cloud Run. They don't need anything for server-side rendering. So we'd recommend using the original Firebase hosting for that. Okay. But you can use the experimental web frameworks integration with Firebase hosting, which will detect Flutter and run the Flutter build before or as part of Firebase deploy. And James has been the creator and maintainer of that integration. So if there's anything you want to add, go for it.
Yeah, it's really that. It's really that that is a use case that is better served by static hosting right now. Eventually, I think the plan is, like I said, like once we have better static asset hosting and app hosting, we'll be more on equal footing. But right now, if we were to spin up Cloud Run, it would just be serving a folder of assets, right? There's no compute happening on that back end. Eventually, I'm hoping that would change. I'd love for like a Dart meta framework to come up and actually have API routes and stuff like that. I think there's a couple community projects around there. And maybe once we support bring your own framework, the community can build those adapters. And you could have your Flutter web app and then a Dart meta framework on top of it.
That's actually something that I wanted to ask about. So let's imagine that I'm working on a completely new framework and I'm absolutely certain it will take off like a spaceship. And I want to make sure that it supports or it works well with Firebase App Hosting. Can I build an adapter today, or is this something that is not yet available publicly? And also, are we kind of like dogfooding this? Is the technique and the tooling around that what we're using something that we're planning on putting out there so other people can use it?
Yeah, right now we support any Node.js application supported by the Cloud Run build packs. So we officially support Angular and Next.js, but you could bring your own Node.js application. Mm-hmm. We might break things in the future, right? That's use at your own risk. But the plan is, as we're nailing that experience down, we want to make it so that the community can build adapters. Like we're really inspired by Nitro adapters and Astro adapters and things of this nature. So the thought is that these will be things that the community can build. We'll build a specification that the community can adhere to. And either the framework authors or the community themselves can build these and plug them into app hosting. I'd say if you're interested in that experience, sign up for the Firebase Alpha Testers pool.
Mm-hmm. Where's that?
It's something that we're really keen on to launch soon. But yeah, if you get involved with the Alpha Testers, I'm sure we will be seeking community feedback on these adapters. And I'm a little secret, I think like Nitro is kind of our next one. We really like Nitro. We've been hearing a lot from the Nux community that they want support. So yeah, tune into Firebase Alpha Testers, join that, get involved. And of course, go on the Firebase user voice and let us know your favorite framework and what we should be supporting.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so you mentioned two resources there. Sorry, Julia. So James, you mentioned two resources here. One of them, the Firebase Alpha group. So if people want to join that, I think you can go to firebase.google.com/community, scroll to the very bottom, and there it says Firebase Alpha program, and there's a sign up form. So that is probably where people should be going. And then the user voice is firebase.uservoice.com, I believe, right? Yeah, it looks like. Okay, so I'll paste these into the chat for people to keep on record. All right, sorry,
Yeah,
Julia, I interrupted you.
Oh, no worries. It's good to get those links out there. Yeah, I actually was going to ask a question to James, just building off of this conversation, because I think this is something that a lot of developers wonder. We say we support Next.js and Angular with a fallback to any Node.js app, but what does that fallback to Node.js mean? Like, what's the difference in deploying a Next application as just a Node.js app versus if we were to have a Next specific framework adapter?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tiers of support, right, is we have our top supported, our Angular, our Next.js. And what we're doing there is we're leaning on top of the cloud build packs, as well as we have an NPM shim. And the idea is that NPM shim will do things like eventually static file optimization. It'll take that build directory, it'll figure out where your static assets are, what the fingerprinted assets are. It'll set cache control headers and all that fun stuff, like automatically. That's the top tier. The second tier, it is a application that already has a specific build pack for Cloud Run. So I think they have a couple. I think they have Nuxt apps and SvelteKit apps and things of that nature, where it will say, okay, I know how to build and I know how to run your application specific to the framework. And I know how to run it in Cloud Run correctly. The final fallback is it'll just call npm run build and npm run start. The real caveat there is that some of these frameworks, the start command might be a dev server. It might not be a production grade server. It might be using hot module reloading or some experience they don't want in production. So that's the real downside of that last bucket is we run npm run build and we run start. That might violate the framework's expectations, but you can just tweak your package JSON to conform to those expectations.
Right.
The real risk is that if either Cloud Run or Firebase App Hosting adds official support for these frameworks, you could see breakage in the future. Maybe Cloud Run starts supporting this in their build pack. Say you're using Nuxt, and you change your build and start commands, and you have a couple, like you have a pre-build and you have a post-start, or you do some other weird side effects beyond the standard framework build tooling. There could be a day where all of a sudden npm run start isn't being called because Cloud Run suddenly has detection of your framework and knows how to start it up on its own. So that's the real risk, is you're just risking breakage in the future with us doing that in a minor because, we're just supporting a new framework. I think as we figure out these community adapters and how you could manually specify the adapter, one of the things going into our decision making on what this API will look like is we want to reduce risk of breakage, right? We don't want you to be relying on a community adapter and then we officially support it and break you in the next minor. So part of this is design decisions and APIs is like, how do we make it so it's less likely to break if you're using something that's community or unofficially supported.
So I'd be extremely curious to look into the how we detect that and the heuristics and stuff like that. But maybe that's something that we can look into later on. But I know that now we've been talking about the product, why it's there, where we're coming from. So maybe it might be a good moment to actually show a demo if you prepared something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me share my screen. I'll give a little overview of app hosting for those watching who haven't used the product yet, and then I'll give a demo of one of our newly released features, which is support for environment-specific configurations. That was one of our top feature requests coming out of Google I/O.
Okay, cool.
All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so here I am looking at the app hosting UI in the Firebase console, and you notice it says My Backend. So the primary app hosting resource is called a backend. And when you create a backend, you connect Firebase to your GitHub repository, you install the Firebase App Hosting GitHub app on your GitHub account, and then we create a Cloud Run service and set up the managed networking layer, cloud build, and everything that's needed to build and run your web app in Google Cloud. So I'll quickly show you what the create backend onboarding flow looks like from the Firebase console. So the first step is importing a Git repository, and I've already installed the Firebase GitHub app on my GitHub account, which is why you see it in this dropdown. But if you hadn't, then the GitHub OAuth flow would pop up where you would install the app on your account. And then select your repository. I have a lot of sample repos. Let's do Julia Angular sample. And then you have your deployment settings. So this is where you specify your root directory and your live branch. Now, the root directory is where app hosting will run your build command. So for me, this is just the root directory of my GitHub repository. But if you had a mono repo, then you might change this to a subdirectory of your GitHub repository. Typically, it's where your package.json lives. And then you can pick a branch for automatic rollouts. And I'll click main. And you can also disable automatic rollouts. CI/CD is generally considered best practice, but maybe you are just getting started and you don't want to pay for unnecessary builds because you're not in a position where every push to your main branch means that it's ready to be rolled out to production. So if you're not ready for automatic rollouts yet, you can disable them. And then name your backend.
Nohe is my favorite. I think is probably the best backend name I've ever heard.
I agree.
Yeah.
And then you can associate your app hosting backend with a Firebase web app. So this is helpful if you're using other Firebase products, like analytics, let's say, and you want to tie that analytic data to this app hosting deployed web app. And app hosting will also automatically create one for you if you don't already have one. So then we'll click finish and deploy. And we'll see a spinner for a little while because we're doing a lot of cool stuff behind the scenes in Google Cloud. So, okay, Nohe is my favorite. This is the backend that I just created. And if I view the dashboard, then front and center, we see information about the current rollout. So since this is my first rollout, I'm in a unique situation where this is in progress. But typically, if I go to this one, let's say, the current rollout is what's actively being served at your live URL. So the most recent successful build or rollout. And then, we had, I think, I just picked a GitHub repository that had a failed build because of some change that I made months ago. I haven't looked at this GitHub repository in a while, so that's my bad. But here I'll show you what would happen if you were using app hosting and your build fails and you want to know why it failed. Well, if you click on the build ID, then this takes you to the build logs in Cloud Build. So for each app hosting rollout in that rollout history table, you have a build, which is associated with a Cloud Build job. And you have a rollout, which is associated with a Cloud Run revision. So let me go back to a working demo. There we go. And here, I'll show you. So each backend is mapped to a Cloud Run service, and then each rollout is mapped to a Cloud Run revision. So if I click View Cloud Run Metrics, then I can see some traffic and utilization metrics for the Cloud Run service that is powering this app hosting backend. And if I look at my revisions, these should map to the rollouts that I see in the Firebase console. And in the Cloud Run revision details, you can see your runtime configuration settings, things like CPU, min instances. You can see environment variables, which I'll demo in a second, how we actually set those up. So with app hosting, when you create your backend, we automatically provision the Google Cloud services needed to build and run a web app. And some of those services we install in your project, such as Cloud Build and Cloud Run, which is why I was able to go in and inspect those in the Google Cloud Console. But there's also stuff that app hosting is doing behind the scenes that I can't see, and that is the networking layer. So CDN, DNS, load balancing. App hosting is actually just managing all of that for you in its own multi-tenant project. And the reason that we decided to do that was so that we could have more control over the networking layer. It allows us to, in the future, integrate with things like app check at the networking layer so that bad requests wouldn't hit your Cloud Run service. It also enables us to support more advanced caching scenarios. It gives us the ability to create optimizations and integrations for customers. So that's why we do it that way. And now I'll demo environment support. So you saw in that Cloud Run revision details that I just showed you an environment variable called welcome message, and it says hello production. So if I actually click on this live site, and this domain, by the way, this is a default domain that app hosting created for me at no additional cost, but I could add a custom domain if I wanted to. I'm just using the default domain for now. And here's my live site. And here's that welcome message that says, hello production, exclamation point. And I'll also just quickly say, you can download the sample code for our Next.js and Angular boilerplates through npm init at app hosting. And that's it. And that is a magical command that James built for us. So thank you, James. And okay, so I have this web app, and this is my production backend. The name of this backend is production demo. The welcome message says hello production, and if I look at Cloud Run, it says min instances is set to 1. Now, let's say you wanted to create a staging environment, right? But you don't want min instances to be 1 in your staging environment because performance doesn't really matter as much, and you want to keep costs low. And maybe you want to change the welcome message, so it says hello staging instead of hello production. So to do that, you would create another app hosting backend. And I cheated. I already created one called staging demo.
Here's one I made earlier.
Yes. And this is tied to the same GitHub repository as the production demo backend I just showed you. So here we can access the GitHub repository. And if we look at apphosting.yaml, and actually let me open this in VS Code so you can see a little bit better. So this is I'm on my GitHub repository opened in VS Code locally. And apphosting.yaml is the configuration file for app hosting that you use to define environment variables, your Cloud Run configuration, things like min instances, max instances, CPU. And for environment variables, you can also reference secrets in this file because this file gets checked into source since app hosting deployments are from GitHub. Obviously, we don't want you checking your API keys into your source code repository. So you can create a secret in Cloud Secret Manager and then reference that secret in apphosting.yaml by just specifying secret instead of value for the environment variable. And we actually created a CLI command to create the secrets in Cloud Secret Manager. It's Firebase App Hosting secret set, I believe, because we've heard that, Google Cloud Console is amazing in many ways. It's incredibly robust. You can do pretty much anything there. But for someone who's more familiar with Firebase, going to the Google Cloud Console, figuring out how to use Secret Manager can be a little overwhelming. So that's why we created a CLI command. It creates a secret, it does all the service account stuff for you. You don't have to think about it, and then you can just reference the name of that secret in apphosting.yaml.
So it basically asks you to type in the secret while you're in the CLI, and it will obfuscate it, and then it will set everything up, and you won't have to care about it because everything's automatically referenced.
Exactly. And it'll even ask you if you want to add the secret reference to apphosting.yaml if it doesn't, if you don't already have it there. And it'll create a smart name for the environment variable based on whatever you named the secret.
Very cool.
It's a nice little extra feature. Okay, carrying on. We want to create a staging environment where we change this environment variable to hello staging, and we want to change our min instances to 0 for our staging environment. So I'm going to do two things. First, actually, I'm going to go back to the Firebase console, and in this staging demo backend, I'm going to click on settings, and this is the new feature that we shipped a few weeks ago, environment name. So I'm going to name the environment for this backend, and I'm going to name it staging, and click save. So now when an app hosting build is triggered for this backend, we will first look for apphosting.staging.yaml, and you can name that environment whatever you'd like. I could name it Nohe is my favorite, and then it would look at apphosting.nohe is my favorite.yaml.
Can you use emojis though?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would say probably not.
Can we try it?
We could.
Because that's the thing that I always wonder about, right? So we have those environments, and I think in the Firebase console, you can tag a project and say this is production, but sometimes you really want to say, oh, this is testing, this is staging, this is production, and I always wish there was something to put a flag on it, like a picture, and emojis are the next best thing, right?
Yeah, it looks like it's not allowed, but you know what?
We'll
add this to the
lowercase letter.
Peter, there's a great website called User Voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me go there.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so now I think that this environment name is super boring, so thanks for that. But yeah, we named this environment staging. So now, if we go back to VS Code, we need to create apphosting.staging.yaml. And I'm just going to copy the contents into here, and let's change this to hello staging and change min instances to 0. Save. And let me commit those. Created staging configuration. Commit, push. Okay.
Is the default min instances, is it always 0? Is that the default?
James is nodding his head.
Yes, yeah, that's the default. If you increase it past 0, it's going to incur costs, right? So by default, we want to be good serverless people, and like if you're not using your application, it doesn't cost you anything.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
when you deploy a Firebase application that uses Cloud Functions, for example, and you're on the command line, and you're not using Firebase App Hosting. So let's talk a regular non-Firebase App Hosting app. I've got a Cloud Function in there, and I set min instances to a non-zero value. I do Firebase deploy, and then it will do its thing. At one point, it will ask, "Hey, because you've got min instances set, this will incur cost." I don't know. Maybe it will even tell me how much it might be, I think. Are we doing something similar here? Because there is no CLI really, right? Because everything's running in the back end and it's being taken care of for me. Is there any place where we expose this kind of warning to the user?
So no, not probably. That's a warning that we could be showing more obviously than we are. I will say when you look at your build logs, you will see the Cloud Run configuration that's being used. And if you have an invalid configuration, because sometimes the values, only certain values are supported, then the build will fail. If you exceeded your quota, it would fail. But we're not warning you that, hey, min instances is set to 1, not 0. But maybe that is something that we should put on user voice.
It's a great thing for user voice.
Yeah, I was about to say, I could either say it here and ask for a panel on the configuration here, or go straight to user voice.
Yeah. So this build has been kicked off, and it'll take a few minutes to finish, just a heads up, but let's just make sure everything else looks good. So if we click on the git commit that triggered this build, we see that, yep, it's a new app hosting.staging.yaml file. And going back to our settings, let's just make sure, yep, environment name is staging. And we can track the progress of the build in Cloud Build. Okay, so this is still going on. And oh, we can see, look here. It's showing, let me zoom in. It's showing the run config that's detected, and we have min instances set to 0. So that's a good sign. That means that it is picking up the right app hosting.yaml file, and we can see environment variable says hello staging.
Yeah, and just to be sure and tie back to what you said about secrets. So if we had used a secret, then instead of actually seeing the secret's value, we would be seeing the secret key where we just saw the staging.
That's correct. So if we look at, look, the build finished. So let me open the live site, and now it says hello staging.
Woohoo!
And just to double check that Cloud Run min instances really is 0, I'm looking at the Cloud Run service for this backend, and it says it is 0. So yeah, and just on the note of secrets, if we were using a secret, we would also see the secret key here, not the value.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm happy that all worked. With live demos, you're always expecting something to go wrong. Yeah.
So we do have a chat question that I think is relevant to this screen.
Yeah.
And it says they're unable to deploy their Angular app to app hosting. It fails during build stage, but locally works without any error. Is there a point or somewhere on the screen you could point out to help them figure out where that build error is coming from?
Yeah, so I would say look at the cloud build logs, and I would also make sure you're using the Angular application builder. James can talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, why don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. The most common problems with Angular are going to be that you're using one of the legacy builders or an older version of Angular. So we actually worked with the Angular team to output a new manifest that basically says, hey, this is where the Angular app is. These are its settings. So that way we don't have to dive in like we did with web frameworks and ng deploy before. We don't have to dive in and read the Angular config because that could break from version to version. So to have a much more stable base, we actually worked with the Angular team to build that manifest. So that's the two most common, is you're just using an older version of Angular or you're using a builder aside from the new application builder. Other things is just, when you run it locally, generally, you're running the dev server. And there's just subtle differences. So dig into those logs. Maybe it's a network failure. Maybe it's a permission error. Maybe you're missing an environment variable. These logs you do have to scroll around a lot, and there's a lot of verbosity here. One of the things that we do know we need to improve on is floating those errors, better surfacing them, so you can take action more quickly to fix a problem. But if you've worked with CI/CD systems, there's always this little bit of a game with whack-a-mole, right? Your continuous integration and deployment server is not your local machine. So you have to play that game of, oh, I forgot this environment variable. Got to reconfigure this. This networking policy is different. So you got to play that game, unfortunately. But yeah, we'd like to surface those errors a little bit better.
And I assume you'd get an email if the build breaks. Is that correct?
Right now, I do not think you get that by default.
Mm-hmm.
But these failures are logged in cloud error reporting because it's a cloud build failure. So I'm not as familiar with that product, but I know you can click around in the cloud pane of glass and actually turn on alerting for those.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Julia, you had a breaking build a couple of minutes before. Maybe we can just jump into that and show people where in the log or in the console they can find the logs.
Yeah. So if you click on the build ID, this will take you to cloud build logs. And if you click on the rollout status, this will take you to cloud run logs. So it's Logs Explorer, but filtered to the cloud run revision where the failure occurred. So I'd say there are times where maybe both of them will show up as failed, but it could have been a cloud run issue, because this is actually a little confusing and something that, as James mentioned, we're working on simplifying the developer experience here. But you know how I said an app hosting build is associated with a cloud build job? That's true, but it also is doing a little bit more than that. It's preparing the cloud run revision. And then during the rollout process, we're activating traffic on the cloud run revision. We're making it live. But it's possible that your build succeeds in cloud builds, and then that little extra thing that app hosting's doing during build time to prepare the cloud run revision, something goes wrong there. Maybe there's an issue with your cloud run configuration. So that currently, as our UX exists today, that would show up as a build failure, but it might be confusing because then you click on the build logs and your build might have actually succeeded, and it's really a cloud run revision issue. So we're working on improving that debugging experience to make sure that developers are sent to the right place when something goes wrong at build or rollout time. But I think we actually do have a link to error reporting. it looks like you might have to set it up, and it's not enabled by default. But
maybe it's not. Are you in the correct project though? You're in Demo September. Is that the one that? Oh, it is.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it looks like we are in the URL querying for the Cloud Run service associated with this backend. Nohe is my favorite. So, but I don't know. Let's see.
This is the adventures of pre-release products, right? And also live demos.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If I just refresh. Yeah, okay, so something's going on with error reporting here.
Okay, so you're saying that for error reporting, people might have to do a little bit of extra setup. It's not something that we provision automatically.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll let the product manager for app hosting know.
Thanks.
I heard somebody say go on user voice.
Yeah.
I had another question about, so if I have an existing Firebase project and I might be using Cloud Functions and now I want to also use Firebase App Hosting, how would I do that? And would I be using a combination of CI/CD and the command line interface to perform the deployment, or will everything be magically happening out of the box whenever I push?
So right now, they are completely separate processes for deployments. For Cloud Functions, you would use Firebase Deploy, and for app hosting, you would push to GitHub. If you had a web app that was using Cloud Functions and you wanted your app hosting rollouts and your Cloud Functions deployments to happen at the same time, that integration is something that we know we need to make better. So another shout out to user voice, upvote that feature request if you want it. One hacky way to do it, I think right now, would be to update your build command in package.json to run Firebase deploy plus the framework build command. And then anytime an app hosting build is triggered, we run your custom build command. Because if we see that it's a custom build command, we run that instead of the default one that our build packs use. The only problem with that, though, is what happens if the app hosting build fails. Like I haven't tested that hack yet, so I don't want to say definitely go ahead and use that. But that is a workaround while we work on a more seamless integration.
Yeah, without something better, right? A real integration between those products, you're gonna always have atomic deploy problems, right? Now you already have this with Firebase Deploy. Parts of it could fail, parts of it could succeed. You're gonna run into that. That's just the nature of using someone else's computer, right? As things can fail, things can roll out. Getting things atomically deployed is really hard. That's actually one of the major problems that we had with hosting and functions before, is tying those products together. Doing atomic deploys is hard. There's also a post build and pre-build in your package JSON. You could always do a command there, but I think you're just introducing more potential breakage to this cloud build job. I would just keep those processes separate until we do a deeper integration. So we do have still the GitHub action. So do continue to use the GitHub action while we're hoping to make some tighter integrations and do some atomic deploys there.
Yeah.
The other downside of doing it all in one, right, is Firebase tools needs to be installed. And that's just adding time to your build, right? You want your builds in a CI/CD system to be as fast as possible, so you can iterate rapidly. So anything that you do that introduces time to the build, the less likely the developers are to use it.
Yeah.
So is the can you share which direction you're thinking for creating this tighter integration? I assume it will be something that is part of the CI/CD flow.
Yeah, very likely. It will look like an integration where our build pack detects that there's a Firebase JSON file, and it'll go, "Hey, you're using Firebase products. You're using Cloud Functions. You're using security rules, right? Like, and maybe you made some changes to your security rules in the same Git commit. Let's roll that out at the same time as the deploy. And if either one of them fails, we stop the deploy, right? That would be what, in my mind, the best integration would look like. But that's something that I have to throw over to product. And
yeah, no, I agree with that. That's also how I imagine it. But I think it also goes the other way, integrating app hosting into Firebase Deploy, because right now Firebase Deploy doesn't work with app hosting because app hosting only supports deployments from GitHub, not direct upload from local source. Direct upload from local source is something that is on our roadmap that people want. I would say upvote it. Another shout out to user voice, upvote this feature request if it's important to you, because I can't commit to a timeline or anything. But once eventually app hosting supports directly uploading files from your local system, then we can integrate with Firebase Deploy so that you run Firebase Deploy and it deploys your functions and to app hosting. And that would be bypassing GitHub entirely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that is actually another question I had. So thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
Nohe, how are we doing on questions from the live stream?
We have a lot of questions from the live stream. There was one question we got on a video on the Firebase Deep Dive the other day, the one that James helped me assemble. And it was about attaching your app hosting instance to like Memcache or one of these other GCP services.
Yeah.
I saw the app hosting.yaml file. I'm wondering how big that might grow.
Yeah, accessing resources in your cloud instance. That's hard right now. That requires VPCs and non-trivial settings. I think that's a future addition that you could see. Absolutely, to that app hosting YAML file is like your VPC configuration, using cloud build pools so that you can actually more finely control the networking access of cloud build. But I have to admit that this is going to be a rough point for a little bit, because some of the assumptions that these frameworks make, like if you're a React developer or a Next.js developer, the assumption is that your build environment looks very, very similar, if not exact, to your run environment, right? Building is just an optimization on the running of the code on the back end. And that's just not the state of the primitives that we're working with right now. Like, this is part of the reason why hosting Next.js is hard on Google Cloud, is build is a different runtime than runtime for your SSR. These are things that you'll just have to bear with it a little bit. They're going to be a little bit different. Just keep an eye on your state, make sure that it's the same. And then we'll work on things like the VPC connectors and using pools. But yeah, I foresee a lot of stuff in the app hosting YAML in the future, a lot of configuration.
And with app hosting, we talked about Next.js, Nux, like all the web frameworks that we know and love today, right? And then we also touched a little bit on Flutter and how static hosting is better for that. What about like some of the other languages that have like dynamic hosting, like Rust or Go or these things? Like, is there a future for this in app hosting, or is this like TBD?
Yeah, I'll just say keep your eyes peeled. We we're using Cloud Run build packs in our build process, and right now we're just using the Node.js build pack. But any of the Cloud Run deploy from source supported languages would be it would be probable that we'd be able to enable those on app hosting in the next. Actually, I'm not going to commit to any timelines, but that is anything that you can deploy to Cloud Run from deploy from source is a good candidate for something that you would in the future be able to deploy to app hosting. So that includes Python, that includes Go, Java, PHP. There are a bunch of supported languages in Cloud Run.
Awesome.
This is also part of the reason why we chose a ground up redesign, because our prior integrations relied on us having support for that language and runtime in Cloud Functions. So now that we're dropping down to Cloud Run, we're just limiting ourselves so we can get the experience right. Mm-hmm. And then once we nail that experience, we'll open up the floodgates.
Yeah, you don't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, right? Yeah. So, and I assume the best place to go and advocate for which one you would like to see is user voice. Awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go log a lot of user voice suggestions right after this.
Yeah.
And then WebAssembly support, does that work today within Next.js and Angular?
To a degree. This is a Node.js server right now. So to the degree that Node.js will support WebAssembly, I know the support's going to be getting better with Node 22 coming out. I think differing languages, I think eventually we do want differing runtimes. So if you are a Bun or a Deno fan, we do eventually want to have a good solution for you. But to risk sounding like a broken record, let's nail down the experience here with Node.js and these two frameworks, and then go from there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There's a few more questions from chat I'm trying to get through as well. Peter, there's a lot of chat messages I'm trying to decipher. Do you want to ask one of them since I've been talking a lot?
Yeah. So let's see. There was one a user asking, I'm having a little problem setting up my hosting. Automatically connects to Firebase. I mean, how can I disconnect from Firebase so I add the API key manually and not automatically from Google Cloud? That sounds a little bit like how can I handle my secrets, right? So would the Cloud Secret Manager be the right place to go for storing API keys?
That would be the correct place for API keys. There are, when I mentioned some of the advanced config we're looking at, like when we start getting into service accounts and default service accounts and web app configuration, these are things we want to allow overriding of. One of the things that we've chosen with app hosting, unlike traditional Firebase hosting and Cloud Functions, is we allow you to override some of these environment variables that were locked down before. So before, anything that was Firebase, you couldn't touch. You couldn't override the Firebase config, the app config, any of those things. So we do want to allow you to override those, even nulling them out, right? But these are things that, like, TBD, keep an eye out on, like, changes that we make to the app hosting YAML file.
Okay.
James, is there also like that special URL that you can go to in hosting today? Is that coming to Firebase App Hosting as well? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where you can just download your API keys for Firebase?
We lost your audio. Oh, there we go. So I'm assuming you mean the magic URLs, like the reserved magic Firebase ones for the auth widgets and the JSON and stuff like that?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so today those are not part of the app hosting experience. We're trying to build something that, while Firebase friendly, is a bit agnostic of Firebase. So, right, this could be something that a cloud customer could be more comfortable using without a bunch of Firebase stuff shoved in there. But we understand for everyone that's a fan of Firebase Auth and our products, we do want a better experience for that. So we're working on those integrations. It might be a little manual right now. It might be you have to like bring in some Next.js middleware or something like that, but we're exploring what those integrations.
Cool.
So there is one more question here, and then maybe we can go to seeing if we missed anything. So there's a user who says, I quite liked the ergonomics of web framework deploys, especially with local deploy and dev server integration. Hope it's not abandoned. What's your take on that?
So it is not abandoned. So we understand this is a very different product between the Git integration and that this is very much SSR first as opposed to SPA first. So we're absolutely still supporting hosting. We want to learn the lessons from the experiment that was the web frameworks deploy. So we're gonna keep that going and figure out if there's a migration story at one point in the future or something like that. But for the time being, that has a use case that we want to support. And we want to move you over. We also want to take some of the magic that we built into web frameworks and still bring that to app hosting, right? We absolutely hear you. The emulator, the local dev story, that's a tighter dev loop with web frameworks, and we want to bring that to app hosting as well.
Yeah, and I would just echo once again, aside from the local source deployments, which is something we're already aware of that we need to eventually implement in app hosting, if there are other things about web frameworks that you love, that you would also like to see in app hosting, definitely create feature requests for those on user voice, because that feedback is super valuable for us.
So
yeah, I know one that we're hearing loud and clear is the integration with Firebase Auth and just authentication in general. That's really hard in app hosting today because we filter out cookies. That is a very complicated architecture of the backend thing that we're working on. But we do hear loud and clear that authentication and authorization is hard in app hosting.
Yeah, that's one of our top priorities right now, I'd say, is getting that right.
That was actually going to be my next question, was what are some of the things that you've taken into consideration that you've gotten from user voice? Because we mentioned it 15 times today, right?
Yeah.
I think we should have a little AI model run in the background to count how many times we said user voice in this phone call.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just kind of curious, what other things might have you received as feedback on there that you're considering or have under consideration?
Absolutely. I think one of the top feature requests on there is support for more regions. Right now, app hosting only supports deploying to US Central 1. So more regions is something we're working on. Cookie support is, of course, a highly upvoted feature request on user voice. That's something we're actively working on. Environment support, so that feature that I demoed today. Until a few weeks ago, we didn't have the ability to create environment-specific app hosting.yaml files. So deploying the same code base to multiple environments with different configurations was pretty difficult. And then we're also getting feature requests for framework support. And Next is one that has been coming up a lot, which is why we are now, as James alluded to, in touch with Nitro and thinking about how we can enable Nitro or community adapters, since Nitro is used by Next. I think those are, CLI deployments is another one on user voice. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Cool. So we're almost at time. Is there anything that you wanted to demo that we didn't get to, or that you would like to mention that we didn't cover yet, or any questions for the users that you might have? Not user voice, but PM voice, or whatever you would want to call it.
Yes, actually, one thing that I didn't clarify in the demo that I just want to quickly call attention to is that you can create your environment.staging.yaml, your environment.production.yaml for config options that are specific to that environment. But let's say you have environment variables that are shared between production and staging, and you don't want to have to like copy and paste those and maintain 2 copies of those. You can put anything that's shared or a safe fallback in apphosting.yaml, and that will always be picked up as well. So in my demo, I had the staging backend and I had a production backend. And in the staging backend, it looked at apphosting.staging.yaml, but it also looked at apphosting.yaml. And if there had been additional environment variables in that file, those would have been present and merged into the final configuration as well. And same thing for my production backend. If I had created an apphosting.production.yaml file, then it would have looked at that, plus it would have fallen back to apphosting.yaml. So just wanted to share that because I think sharing environment variables between environments is also a common use case that we hear about. So we intentionally designed this in a way so that you could separate things, but also share things if you wanted to.
Okay, so it means that the more specific YAML file is an override, and it would replace any variables that you already have in the base file.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say some of the things that like I'm very keen on exploring is making the Firebase products right now work better in SSR, right? So it's not just our hosting products that's has sort of this baked-in assumption of SPAs are the way of the world. It's also our JS SDKs, our admin SDKs. So I would say for those users, like check out what we've been doing on the Firebase JS SDK. Look at the new Firebase server app class, that initializer. Go onto the GitHub. You can file issues on the Firebase JS SDK GitHub repo. Give that a try. We're looking to support better SSR and different runtimes, even aside from app hosting, right? If you were to host this on one of these, newfangled edge compute products, we also want to support you there. So we are making some steady improvements on the SDK side. Check that out. Let us know if you run into any issues, and file feature requests there on GitHub.
Awesome. Sounds great. So where should people go if they want to get started with this? So they've heard a lot about what it can do and all the powerful features. Where is the initial step they can take?
Check out our docs. And I mentioned this earlier, but we have a script, npm init app hosting, that will download a boilerplate Next.js or Angular app with an apphosting.yaml file created by default, and then head over to the Firebase console, create your backend, and connect it to your GitHub repository. We also have a code lab. So
yes, the Next.js code lab.
Too. Yes.
All right. Yeah, we'll be sure to post a link to the code lab into the comments. And I think the documentation should be easy enough to find.
Yeah, we're in public preview now, so all of that's live. Check it out at firebase.google.com.
Yeah, or firebase.com. It redirects. All right. That was amazing. Thanks so much for coming on, Julia and James, and for giving us insights into how Firebase App Hosting works, how it's different from the regular hosting, and a glimpse into the future, and for plugging ways how to get your feature requests in front of PM and DevRel. That was amazing.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for coming on. So folks, any remaining questions you might have, feel free to put them into the chat. We will try to answer any remaining ones. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, future guests that we should invite to Firebase After Hours, please reach out to us either in the comments to this video or by tweeting at us on Twitter. You can tweet at the Firebase handle, but sometimes it's easier for Nohe and me to see it if you directly tweet at us. I'm at Peter Friese. And Nohe, what's your handle?
At NoheDev, NoheDev.
Great. All right. And that's it. Thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.